Discover Help presents Stress-Free Living with Ray Samich and Mr. Stress-Free Ratanjit S. Sandhi. This audio program is an unscripted and unrehearsed conversation between Ray and Ratanjit. It is shared with you in hope of adding value to your life. We encourage you to listen to this program in its entirety to receive the full impact of its message. Sit back, relax, open your heart, mind, and soul to this edition of Stress-Free Living.
Welcome to all of our listeners. This is Ratanjit Sandhi. We are bringing to you Stress-Free Living program. Today, our main host, Ray Samich, is on a special assignment, so he will not be able to join us. But we have a special guest, which you have heard for the last couple of weeks, Dr. Shrikantaya. And Param is a great scholar and very sought after speaker. He has given many talks at on TED Talks, and he has a wide variety of knowledge and understanding of psychology, and he teaches at Baldwin Wallace College and human behavior. Welcome, Paramji. How are you?
Thank you very much. I'm extremely grateful to a flattering introduction. It helps salvage my sagging morale every time you speak of me in such positive terms. I'm grateful to all of you for tuning in, for the privilege of joining this conversation. Thank you, Ratanjit.
So, sir, what are we talking about? You brought in a very wonderful topic today. And so give us a brief scenario of what you want to talk about today.
Excellent. So I thought it would be worthwhile to spend some time on this show talking about the ways in which the unconscious mind, as it is called, influences and shapes our experience of the world, our experience of each other, and our experience of life. I think to a very great extent, we have come to believe that the rational mind, which you might call the executive mind, which is also the conscious mind, is the one that determines the choices that we make and the outcomes that we enjoy, while psychologists and others tell us that in reality, human beings are driven by unconscious motives that they might not even be aware of. So on the one hand, I might be thinking that I'm making all these conscious choices, but at the same time, there are deeply buried unconscious motives that in a very fundamental and invisible way are shaping my experiences. Perhaps I'll just throw in a couple of examples of unconscious motivation. So one of them might be that a young man takes up a job and he finds himself in conflict with his boss. He quits, he goes to another job and finds himself generating a very similar conflict. He has a recurring experience of a series of conflicts with bosses. Most people will try to intervene at the level of conscious behavior to help him talk through what difficulty that he is having in his bosses, while an astute psychologist might actually delve deeper and find a parallel between some of the challenges that he's facing with his boss or multiple bosses and some of the unfinished baggage of his own complicated relationship with his father or mother or other caregivers that has been left over from his childhood. In other words, the difficulties that this young man might have faced in his relationship with an authoritarian parent as a child may be sabotaging his chances of having a functional relationship with his boss. Seldom do people think at that level. So if I'm having many difficulties and challenges, it's very rarely that I will actually start delving into my own history to understand the roots of these difficulties. So that's just one example. Excuse me. As another example, many of us may not have considered that the thousands of divorces that happen in society, many of those divorces are driven by emotional forces that are the result of childhood experiences. For example, we grew up around caregivers who were perhaps in many cases married. They exhibited certain patterns of conflict and cooperation. Just from observing and being in the presence of them, we may have absorbed those patterns and we might play out those patterns without awareness. In other words, unconsciously in our own marriage. So a variety of human scenarios are subject to the unknown mystery of unconscious motivation. And I thought it's a good marriage of philosophy and psychology. And the Indian mystic Osho, who left behind over 2,000 books on various dimensions of human consciousness, often talked about the marriage of the East and the West, and how do we put together the insights of both these hemispheres in order to elevate our understanding. And I thought that marriage of the East and West is achieved even through exploring the idea of unconscious motivation, because Western psychology and Eastern wisdom traditions might approach this somewhat similarly and somewhat differently. So with your interest in oneness and understanding oneness as an ameliorative, emancipatory state of consciousness, I thought it would be nice to get your views also, Ratanjit, on when you see people stuck in various patterns of behavior that we see are in one way or another dysfunctional. The psychological approach is to delve into perhaps the unconscious mind and help the person become aware of these unconscious motives. What might the spiritual solution to this look like? So let's take up the two examples that I shared with you. One of the man who's repeatedly quitting jobs because he's got leftover residue, emotional baggage from his childhood. The patterns of conflict that he had with his authoritarian father are being reenacted in his life. What would be a form of spiritual process in which you can awaken him? And the man who gets the couple that gets married and starts importing dysfunctional patterns that they've absorbed from their earlier experiences of marriage, seen in their caregivers. These are two examples of people being driven by unconscious motives and having the experience of groping in the dark. They all have positive intentions. The man who's constantly quitting his job has the earnest desire to actually have a functional relationship with his boss and hold on to a job and enjoy his work. The couple that's married want to be happily married, but despite their conscious stated intention of the positive outcomes that they're clamoring for, the reality of their lives is sadly very different. So let's talk about a spiritual resolution of this conundrum, just as I suggested that the psychological one might involve delving into the unconscious. So Ratanjit, how would oneness apply to the iceberg of the conscious and unconscious mind?
Well, before we go there, Brahmji, I think we have to understand a couple of things. So now, what you are saying is also verified by child psychologists. They say a human psyche, which stays with us all our life, is formed before the age of, in some cases, they're 6, some are, they say, even as early as 3. See, to understand this as a child, when child is born, they are basically has 5 senses, and they look at this world through their insecurity because they haven't seen anything. Anything gives them pain. Anything gives them suffering, loud sound. And any of these, when they are around their parents, when the parents are fighting, raising their voice, that episode stays with them all that life, because they are, and those, so it is very critical. We are not given special training before we and become parents, because parenthood is automatically, I was brought by my parents, so what is there? Child is considered to be a toy and you play with it, and the most important thing parents think is to teach them ABCD and the map of the world and those kind of things. They don't realize that if they can somehow make the child secure, that security. And another thing that neuroscientists tell us, that a child sees things through reflective mirror neuron in their brain. They copy what they see. It's not the language they understand, because the language is very difficult, or the same word means differently as we grow up. So it is very important for people who are around a child to have right habits, because those habits are going to be be copied, and that those habits of speaking softly, loving, understanding, explaining to your partners, whoever is around you, all those things are so critical. When I was born, and one of the advice my caregivers or doctor gave my parents, he says, don't raise your voice in front of him. And it was amazing. My parents were always very loving and caring. They never did. So nobody ever shouted at me growing up. Nobody ever, and you can't randomly criticize. No, you cannot do that. And when we say that, we are raising our voice. And there was a very interesting instance. A neighbor moved into a new neighborhood, or a family moved into a new neighborhood, and there was about 8-year-old son they had, and he was introduced to the neighbor's son, who was also around the same age. So they became good friends. So one day, this old friend, neighbor requested to the new friend that let's go in the woods and let's play in the woods. And this new guy, new boy said, no, I can't go. My dad is going to get mad. Now, there is a tremendous hidden wisdom in that thought process. So that means whenever the father told him not to do something, all he noticed was that he was mad. His voice was raised. He never listened to what he was saying. So this is a fundamental thing. Yes, what you are saying is so true, that all those things which we experience during the childhood, the treatment we get during the childhood, stays with us throughout our life. And it molds us how we are behaving with our family, how we are behaving with our society, and all those areas. Now, you brought a very good point of how to solve this. And before I go there, I would like some more comments from you. Go ahead.
Sure. I could relate to that example of how many of our childhood experiences and recollections get permanently entrenched in our consciousness and create almost like a lens, as if you will, on our perceptions of the world, and it becomes a filter. In fact, Eric Berne, the Canadian psychoanalyst and psychiatrist, has written a book called Games People Play, and it's a very interesting extension of some of the fundamental tenets of classical psychoanalysis. So he says, it's almost like we function in 3 different ego states. So we think Param is one person, but could he actually be 3 different people? Who are these 3 different people? There's a voice in my head that often sounds just like my parents. And that's what you were talking about, Ratanjit, that sometimes the voice of our parents gets entrenched in our head. So many of our listeners will notice that there are times during the day when there is a voice in their head that is sounding just like their parents. And when they speak to their children, or when they speak to other people working for them, they're actually repeating the same voice in the head, which is the entrenched voice of the parent. Now, there is another voice in their head, which is a very rational voice, which Eric Berne would call the voice of the adult. that always tries to talk in a very rational way, because that kind of rationality is accepted by the world, and it is the adult's signature style of functioning, to appear very in control, rational, balanced, and so on and so forth. And then the third voice that Eric Berne talks about is the voice of the child, that within each one of us, there's almost like a little child inside us, which is acting childlike and perhaps at other times childish. Now, Berne also went on to divide these voices. So it's not just the parent. Sometimes I act like a nurturing parent with kindness. At other times, I act like a critical parent. In fact, from the time we were children, we've probably been criticized for so many different things. People tell us, this is not the way you should be holding your fork. You're spilling too much of your food. I don't like the way you talk to a neighbor. You need to be more polite. You haven't been sharing your toys with anybody. Your room is a mess. Why didn't you make your bed when you woke up? There is an endless sea of criticisms that often are directed by well-meaning and well-intentioned parents. And as a result of that, Osho talks about a condemner that gets installed within us, a condemner that constantly keeps criticizing us. For example, try this, just as the weather is improving now in the Cleveland area. If you were to sit outside this afternoon, in the nice weather under a tree, enjoying the weather, enjoying the breeze and all of that, and for an hour, you'll say you're just going to relax in nature, no iPhone, no technology. The chances are that within a few minutes, there'll be a voice that will start criticizing and condemning you. That'll tell you you're wasting your time. You should be taking the clothes to the dry cleaner. You should be getting the car cleaned. You should be getting the vacuum cleaner fixed. The endless series of chores that we have to take care of. So often a very unconscious force that's present in us is that internal condemner that's telling us, no matter how much you do, you're not doing enough, you're not having enough. So there is that voice of the condemner, which is the critical parent. It condemns us. And if we are condemning ourselves constantly, we are likely to be very critical of people around us as well. We are not going to be appreciative of them and of their contributions. So the parent itself could be the nurturing parent or the critical parent. And many of our relationships are destroyed by the voice of the critical parent inside us, because that critical voice keeps criticizing everybody else. And human beings will show us their inner beauty only when they feel safe in our presence, only when they feel appreciated and loved. And so many of us are in relationships where we have deprived ourselves of seeing and witnessing the beauty of the people they are with. Our children are hiding from us. Our spouses are hiding from us. The employees or people who report to us are hiding from us. Why? Because we have an overly critical attitude, a judgmental attitude that we might have unconsciously imbibed from our own childhood, which doesn't allow us to be providing a safe space for them to show us their gifts and their beauty. And we get stuck in those patterns. So Ratanjit ji, one of the questions I have is about the role of education. So you were right in saying that the habits that we have, that we display, children respond more to who we are than also to what we say. I might claim and profess a very, an attitude of magnanimity, a very set of values that seem like high ideals to me. But the children are going to pick up what is in my being on a day-to-day basis. They absorb the reality of who I am, not what I profess. And therefore, one of the challenges is that given the fact that our parents have been imperfect in most cases, many of us enter life's arena as adults with so many dysfunctional patterns. How do we then awaken ourselves to oneness? How do we then, for example, if I'm having fractured relationships with my spouse or with my children or with my bosses, what might be a process through which, and spiritually, I could get beyond those divisions? And here's where I'm going with this. My critique of Western psychology, and is the little that I've studied, is that so much of Western psychology initially was derived from studying people who were having a lot of challenges in adjustment. And therefore, it was a psychology of people of not of wellness, but of sickness. And we built theories based upon that limited sample of people. And if we are in a fractured state of consciousness, if I'm in an ego mode of consciousness, aware of my separateness, aware of me as is living in a separate bubble, then in that situation, a lot of the unconscious forces will drive my behavior. And I'm saying, is there a way that I could move from this fragmented consciousness, the isolationism that the lack of oneness provides, to the holistic experience of oneness? Would many of the problems that I'm facing actually dissipate and dissolve, even without perhaps excavating my unconscious through a spiritual step?
We need to take a quick break. But before we take a break, I'm going to ask you a question.
Okay.
See, our parents had parents, and they had parents. So their psyche has been, our human race psyche has been hijacked for centuries.
Absolutely.
So how do we correct this psyche? How do we bring in parents who are not contaminated with the garbage their parents have given them?
That is a beautiful question of how do we reverse the process? How do we break this intergenerational transmission?
Hold that, and we are going to take a break, and we'll be right back. Thank you. So, okay, we can open that to any questions. If anybody has quickly, please open your mic and or unmute yourself.
All right, so Dr. Steve Marsh, asking a quick question, or not asking, a comment/question. When you said, how do we reverse it? So I have a friend who you could not reach on any level, discussion, deep discussion, being kind, oneness, helping other people. And he actually went through Alcoholics Anonymous. He had drug and alcohol problems. And coming out of it, he is a very different person. And I said, what makes it different? It's what you were saying. There wasn't judgment. When you go into the room, he said, everybody accepts you where you are. How can we help you move forward? And he is a very different person. And I said, the best thing that ever happened was that you had to go through that, because it opened your eyes to the different world. Now he volunteers, and he has a very good sense of philosophy, which you could never have gotten had he not gone through this and met with a group every Saturday morning that doesn't judge him.
Beautiful example, Steve. And I know of, I think the AA does amazing work. It's probably one of the most effective treatments for alcoholism and other forms of substance abuse. They're rich in both psychological and spiritual perspective. Very rich.
Yes.
Very good point. Yeah.
But that's why all the difficulties are blessings, because they realign you, because they give you a shock.
Right. Indeed.
I think we are coming close to we are back for MG. So I had asked that question. So what is your response to that question?
Well, when it comes to reversing the intergenerational transmission of these patterns, first, I do want to acknowledge that there's a very important role in seeking help, in seeking therapy. One of our listeners who's on the show recounted the outstanding recovery made by somebody who went through an AA program, Alcoholics Anonymous, and came out fully healed from their traumas and all of that. And the gentleman was also talking about, he asked him what was the most important aspect of his recovery that facilitated his recovery. And the gentleman said that within AA, there was a complete suspension of judgment. He did not feel judged for who he is, what he has done, what he might be suffering from. And I think an unconditional acceptance, and in fact, this even comes from psychology. One of the things that many therapists are able to provide is what Carl Rogers, the humanistic psychologist, had called unconditional positive regard. When we have the experience even in one relationship, and that could be with somebody we know, but more often with a therapist who has no judgment and who accepts us with unconditional positive regard. That type of non-judgmental compassion has almost like an instantaneous ameliorative effect on the individual. And I have seen people be transformed very much, through therapy, as well as by participating both in group therapy and individual therapy. So certainly therapy is a very powerful a way in which one can become aware. I know of people who have identified patterns that have been intergenerationally transmitted for a long time and that have healed from that. So certainly that is one of the ways of interrupting, the flow, if you will, the robotic transmission of mechanical patterns. Other ways to reverse it. Now, of course, what happens though, and my concern is this, that there are some of our problems or challenges are sufficiently disruptive that we decide to seek professional help, and we might seek therapy, we might seek going to a clinical social worker, a therapist, and all of that. But there are many other challenges that we face which have their roots in unconsciously living our life, which actually we do never seek therapy, we never seek professional assistance because they have not grown to a magnitude that demand that kind of an intervention. So we're somehow muddling along in life with all of these ills, which are substantially reducing the quality of life. And that is where I believe an enlightened consciousness would open up the door. So I'd like Ratanjit to weigh in on what would be your answer to the same question, Ratanjit.
See, one thing we have to realize that in our life, there are so many influencing forces which are around us. We have our family, our community, social group, school, or religion, our occupation, our social status, politics, science, art, music, recreation, world events, weather, and gravity. Electricity around us also has influence. Solar system, astrology, numerology, and magic, light, nature, and meditation, prayers. So all these things are constantly influencing us. Okay, so it's like this. So if you are a tree in a forest, and your roots are not very deep, wind blowing 50 miles an hour or something like that can uproot you. But if your roots are deep, you can tolerate all the storm around you. So all these worldly things can never give you deep roots. They are surface phenomena. And half of them, you don't really accept them fully because your mind is constantly, no, because it depends on who tells you, where you heard, and all those kinds of things. And then your inner insecurity, your fear, your greed, all that allows you to, that's why two people given the same information understand things totally differently, because we contaminate the information coming in with our insecurities, with our fear, with our greed, and with our experiences of life. And so until we have that stronger force, which is going to hold you in your position, in your sanity, all these things are going to influence you. And we can constantly blame all these things because I am behaving because of this, because I was mistreated, and society has not been fair, or justice system has not been fair, or and so on and so forth. But once you realize that there is a force within you which is much more stronger than any other force existing outside of you. But unfortunately, we do not connect to that force. And nobody really teaches us how to connect to that force. And once, see, it's like loneliness. People are lonely, and they say that because there is no loved one around them. The loneliness is not because of the absence of loved ones around you. Loneliness comes from the love which is absent within you. If you become the ocean of love, loneliness disappears. So that ocean of love within you cannot simply come from thinking. I can one day get up and say, I'm going to love everybody. I'm going to have love within me. I'm going to rest. It doesn't happen like that. You have to find that true force, which purely is love. And that true force really is what gives you life. It's an enlivening force present within you. And it is the same force which is present in everyone. But this knowledge we have been talking about on this show for many, many years now. But knowledge does not transform you. There are doctors who have been trained how to have good health. They understand. But I was shocked to hear that average lifespan of a doctor in US is 8 years less than the normal person in US. Now they are trained to be healthy, but they have not converted that knowledge into living habits. So until you live this habit of living in the understanding or the presence of this force which is within you, you will not be empowered. So once you realize that force within you, all your old experiences of life dissolve. And that force sparks you into oneness because you see the same thing in others present, which is present within you. The enlivening force is exactly the same. It's like the electricity present in a light bulb. All the light bulbs can be of different configuration, color, shape, but when they are lit, when they're alive, they have a live wire connection to a single power source, live wire connection. So we have a live wire connection to the ultimate force. You can call it God if you are religious. But when we worship God, when we segregate God, other than the force which enlivens me, then you are really not utilizing the force and the power which is present within you. So at this point, I will ask some questions from you or let you take the platform. So what I'm saying, does it make any sense to you?
Yes, to me, it makes very sense because personally, at least, I have been immersed in, the study of what the behavioral sciences have to offer and the various wisdom traditions, whether it's Sikhism, Sufism, Zen, Buddhism, all of Christianity, all of the various wisdom traditions of the world. And I have been struck by exactly what you're saying, that when you have an inner explosion of love, that arises from the experience of oneness, that is exponentially therapeutic. It has the effect of dissolving so many of these patterns that we might be struggling with, because love is the ultimate healing force. And you can step into and experience the power of unconditionally loving. And it could be loving people, things, whatever it is. And Osho, for example, always insisted, it doesn't matter what you love. It is stepping into the ocean of love. However you might experience it, when you start loving, there are amazing forces that are unleashed within you, that are healing, that actually cause many of these things that we are laboring under the burden of, and for those to dissipate and dissolve. So I think you made a very beautiful case, Ratanjit, of how the spiritual experience of oneness, of unleashing and accessing the oceans of love that are there within us. And in fact, many of the Eastern masters have believed that we are capable of immense love, but we have erected obstacles in the path, that our arteries are almost like blocked by our childhood memories, blocked by conflicts, blocked by our own ego consciousness. And when we release those arteries, when we unblock them and love begins to flow, there is a tremendous healing that happens in all of our relationships. I'm totally with you. I think you make an excellent case. I want to shift the trajectory of our discussion a little bit to something that I am passionate about, and I want to share how I see it, and also have you share your views. So one of the challenges that I see in a highly polarized United States that we live in is the number of things that seem to divide us. We can't seem to agree on vaccines. We could not agree on masks or not masking. We can't agree on what's taught in schools. Some people say critical race theory is being taught. Children are being indoctrinated. We cannot agree on what are the best environmental policies to pursue. Capitalism. Think of the vast number of topics that divide us. Now, I used to also be an adjunct faculty in a school of government and policy in Washington, D.C. And I was struck by how in a school of public policy, there are very advanced and specialized courses on each of these topics. You can take 2 semesters worth of courses on environment. You can take multiple courses on health policy. You can take all of these, and you become a scholar in these disciplines. And of course, you will be exposed to all the debates, and you will be given the analytical capabilities and the knowledge base to be able to speak very intellectually and knowledgeably about this theory and this school of thought and that school of thought and all of that. And when we go out into society, we find so much hatred, people unable to even enter into any kind of dialogue or conversation with people whose beliefs are different. Biden supporters hate Trump supporters. Trump supporters hate Biden supporters. Democrats and Republicans can't make peace with each other. And all of these divisions. And I want to share with you an experience of mine that was kind of very important to me in helping me look past these surface level divisions. This was a time when I was involved in what is called international development, where you are working on poverty alleviation efforts globally, internationally. I was working on several USAID projects, World Bank projects, and I had been exposed to a school of thought that talked about how the idea of development and underdevelopment, the very idea, is an expression of global racism, because at some level it implies that some societies are higher and some societies are lower, and the societies that are lower have to imitate and catch up with the societies that are higher. Clearly, I could see that this was a form of racism, in a sense that European civilization had placed itself at the front of the race and the rest of the world had to catch up. So there are a number of analyses that are there that talk about what would international development look like? What would cooperation between nations look like if they get past this thinking of development and underdevelopment? And I used to get into fierce debates with experts, where I would be so emotionally enraged and charged, and fierce arguments. One day I decided, inspired by one of Osho's books, to sit down and look at what was it that was getting triggered in me? Why was I getting so worked up about this? In the same way that people are getting worked up about climate, vaccines, and masks, I was getting worked up. And suddenly, in a moment of insight, I saw that this topic had a lot of charge for me because it represented certain parallels in my childhood. I grew up in a family where one of my brothers was a physicist, the other was an engineer. They were all very people who were doing extremely well in school. And I was the only kid who was doing very poorly in school. So in my mind, I was the third world of the family. I was like the underdeveloped part of that family. And my suppressed anger at being looked down upon had actually gotten transplanted into these intellectual debates. And all the energy that I had to pick fights with people who did not share my set of beliefs was actually coming from me seeing myself as a third world nation and wanting to fight for greater equality and acceptance. The moment I had this psychological insight, I burst out laughing. I said, I don't have to fight these people. I can understand what's going on. And it's not as if my beliefs changed or I stopped doing the work that I was doing, but I had transitioned to a different way where I could understand that my getting so riled up was the result of unconscious forces. The reason I share this is only because I would say that in US society, we're fighting about so many things. We don't even know why we are fighting about this and what kinds of unconscious experiences are driving our animosities towards each other.
So with that, let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back and try to answer this. Okay, we are open. Anybody wants to say something, please open up your mic. We have Sana Rupani. Sana, how are you?
I'm good. Hello. A big hello for the gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lovely hearing the wonderful knowledge you all are sharing through this platform. I'm of the same opinion that the same is happening in Indian society as well. The media, the politics, they all are in their race to make form public opinion, and people are busy fighting and proving each other right and wrong. Instead, it's better to do a little bit very quietly. That will make a world a better place if we all contribute very quietly in our own ways.
Beautiful. So, you know, the amazing question is, you see this very nice, humble person, and suddenly people pursue him to run for Congress or make them into a leader. And once they become a leader, they become totally different.
Absolutely.
Why is that? So that is a very interesting aspect of life.
The ego pops in, the identity factor which creeps in, that I am something. And then people associate with that.
So they say power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yes.
So I have a question. I have a quick question. So when you had that aha moment, when you realized this is what caused you to be so angry in your discussion, my question would be, if we are in a similar situation, how does one reach that point? Does one stop?
Steve, hold on.
That and say, how do I get to that good place that you got? And because that's always the issue. We're all in a situation, something's pressure, you feel this, that, and do you have the ability, I guess we do have the ability to stop and go in a different direction.
Thank you.
We are back, and we had some interesting conversation with our participants on Zoom. Thank you very much. They bring tremendous value to us. Paramji, you have a quick comment before I answer that question?
Right. So one of our listeners raised the issue. I had shared just before the break that I had a transformative moment when I began to see that all the animosity that I was having in these intellectual debates on a matter of economic policy had its roots in my childhood situation. I would say, I think it's very important at this time that we stop fighting each other in intellectual debates alone. We are fighting issues at the policy level. We are using our knowledge to hit each other on the head with a hammer. Somebody brings research on all the vaccines causing all the problems. Somebody else brings research on vaccines being good, bad, good. And we are fighting at the level of these ideas. We are completely unaware of the fact that this level of superficial level of intellectual debate is not going to solve anything. What is required at this time is an opening of our heart. And one of the ways in which our hearts can open is for us to ask ourselves the simple question: if I am all for, if I'm more pro-war, if I am against critical race theory, for critical race theory, if I'm against capitalism, for capitalism, what has happened in what is this debate actually a surrogate for? What am I identifying with? What are some of the childhood conditions that I've had that have led to the beliefs that I have today? Because one of the things that psychology and spirituality remind us, that when we are angry, the flip side of this coin is fear. When I'm angry, debating somebody with a different point of view, I'm actually in fear. And that fear expresses itself as anger. When I'm threatened, I become angry. And the experience of feeling threatened is an emotional experience that has its roots in many childhood experiences. I think in the media, we need many more people in the airways, on television, inviting Americans to look into why do they believe what they believe, and when they get angry, to look into what is it that they're afraid of, what in their childhood actually has created these set of triggers. I think that kind of introspection will leave us in a very different place. Rather than pointing the finger outward, we will start looking inward. And it's only that inward pilgrimage of insight and not knowledge, wisdom and not information, that will unleash the breakthrough. Thank you. Ratanjit, over to you, sir.
So you touched the key ingredient of all our basic fundamental issues. It's the fear. As a child, in the fear mode, when you see everything, that creates an impression. So to understand where the fear comes from, there are two aspects of how we can live our life. One aspect is as we live in the human body mode. You know, in the human body, which is created naturally to have fear, because it knows that it is going to die. It is subjected to injury. It is, when there's not enough food, it can starve. So it has to protect. It is natural instinct to be afraid, to protect this body. So this natural instinct as a child allows you to capture those moments which are seen through the eyes of fear. And they make a permanent mark on your life. The only way we cannot have fear, there's other side of us which is not afraid of death, which is the power which enlivens the human body. So that knowledge, that understanding, that feeling, that experience is not given to us at an early age, And even at later in life, we join a religion also because of fear. We address every issue in our life because of fear. And this fear, eventually, when I mentioned that if you take a decent human being, which looks nice and does all this, give that person power, And suddenly you see a totally different side of that person. So it's not any Democrat which is bad, or it is the Republicans which are bad. None of that is good or bad. They are parked in insecurity. And because of that insecurity, they act differently. And then this human body considers itself as a separate entity. You are different, then I am different. So as a consequence, it wants to have its own validity. That's where the ego comes in. So we live our entire life with ego, fear, greed, insecurity. And the more insecure you are, the more ego going to show in our life. So we are looking for security in wealth, in title, in family relationship, in a society, in an environment, all that. So we are never going to be fully secure until we realize the true security which already exists within us. That security is the force which enlivens us. I keep on saying that, but until we realize that, we can talk about anyway. There are millions of ways to fall sick. There's only one way to be healthy, free of sickness. And the only way to be free of sickness, of our security, insecurity, fear, greed, is to realize that we are the power which enlivens us. So now, how do we get rid of all these years of habit of living in insecurity, fear, and greed? That is our possession. That is our wealth. How can I get rid of this? So until you do an exercise, which I again want to repeat at this point, when we get up in the morning and look in the mirror, and you see this reflection of you as a human body, then you want to go through your mind what an amazing instrument this human body is. It has capability of generating blood in itself, serve itself. It has amazing computer to memorize things. So then you realize that this human body is gifted to us. And that brings gratefulness. Now, the moment gratefulness comes in us, it gives you a shower. It is equivalent to a shower which takes away all your dirt which you have accumulated. The dirt of insecurity, dirt of anger, dirt of poison, jealousy, all those things go away. The moment you are embedded in gratefulness, the human body is the biggest gift you have given to us to operate our journey on this earth. And then second exercise is to close your eyes and then look deep into your eyes, and you see the power which is present within this body to enliven you. Without that power, this body is going to be dead meat, and you can't even keep it it'll start disintegrating. So once you realize see the power within you, you bow to the power, you be grateful to that power. And this exercise, if you repeat consecutively every single day, you begin to slowly shift your mind from the insecure mode, operated within the body mode, to the secure mode, which is operating in the power which enlivens you, which is where you need to go. And then you begin to see the same power in anyone who you come across. you have a natural instinct to serve that power, because that is the highest force which is present on this earth. And as a consequence, the love automatically flows out of you. Instead of judging the other person, you become sympathetic, you become in a mode to serve that person, to add value to that person, and your life begin to fall in place. All your relationship improve, all your work ethics changes, and you become successful at work, you become successful with your, and most interestingly, you begin to generate hormones which are much more healthier for your human body. You become much more healthy. So I think we have come to a almost at the end of this. You have 20 seconds, Paranjit, to say something, and then we are going to end this program. And
Well, I would thank you. I think the only thing I would say is sometimes it helps us to remember that we all assume we are living in the same world, and we are, but we are also living in very different worlds. And each of us has come to a certain belief about reality and about the world based on our experiences, and to be able to cultivate respect for other people's viewpoints, recognizing that they have had a different journey and they have come to a different set of conclusions.
Thank you so much. And thank you for all our listeners all around the world. And we'll be back next week. Thank you.